Okay, so we got our packages installed that we needed. We set up our connection string. And our next step in getting this database up and running, and one of the most critical steps here, is to create what's called a context file. Now, the context file in this entity framework is the thing that actually communicates between the app and the database. And so it's the liaison between the app and the database. The model itself is a class, and we're going to create instances of this class. But as we update the database, it happens through this context file. It's the thing that communicates. And so I'll close that, but in my models folder, so anything to do with database goes in the models folder. I'll right click and say add, and then I'm going to add a new item. Now again, this is just going to be a regular old class, but I'm going to name it something, and this isn't anything that .NET picks up on, that does it automatically, but I'll usually name it something like dating application context. And so something with context in there is how we typically see that, so that we can identify that is the context file. And if there's multiple databases, we can have multiple context files. All right, so I'll add that, and we'll see it's just a regular old class. But we're going to turn it into not a regular old class by inheriting from the DbContext. Now, initially it won't recognize this, but if we hover over the red line, and it will say, there's a problem here, I don't recognize what DbContext is, and then we can always click on this little light bulb to show us potential fixes. And notice it says, oh, did you want to use the DbContext from Microsoft Entity Framework Core? This is the package that we just brought into our program. And so I can click on that, and it will bring it into my program, and now it says, oh, I know what you're talking about, the DbContext file, of course. All right, so we inherit from a general DbContext file, which means we're going to get all the functionality of a normal DbContext file, database context file, in our class we've created called dating application context. We then, the next thing we do is create a constructor. So we say public dating application context. It's already doing it for us. And so it's going to create the little constructor for us. Now in these parentheses, we need to type some stuff in here. And we are going to set up options. And one of the options we're going to do is to use SQLite. And so we'll do that in a minute. But we're going to set up a place to receive those options into this context file as this dating application context class is created. And so I'll say DbContext options is what we want to type. And then it's going to say, well, what type of DbContext options do you want? And then in the angle brackets, we're going to type in dating application context. All right, so we are creating now again, I don't expect you to know what this is doing, but I hope you feel confident in that you can get in and read and understand what it's doing enough to be able to get in and figure it out. And so I'm creating a class here called DbContext options. I don't know what that is necessarily. I can hover over it, I can get more information about it. But these angle brackets indicate that we're going to be getting a DbContext options of type dating application context, which refers to our class here. So we're getting DbContext options of this type that I'm going to name options. Now this part's critical and easy to miss. We not only want the options that are passed in, but we also want options that are inherited. And so I'm going to put a little inheritance sign here, our colon, and say I want to get the base options as well. All right, so this line probably is not making a ton of sense to you. Maybe it is, and if it is, great, but probably not, and that's okay. Just know for now, in teaching this stuff, it's really hard because you got to start somewhere, right? And build some context, and then once we have enough peripheral knowledge, then these things start to make sense. But all we're doing here is as we create a dating application context instance, is we're giving away in the constructor here to set up any options and include the base options in that setup. And just to make this a little more obvious, I'll put this down here. We're going to leave this blank for now. But this is just a constructor that's going to set up those options. All right, the last thing we need to do in the context file is to actually, I was going to say build our table. This is going to be what builds our table. And so we need to make a database set. So we're going to have a public DB set. So public DB set of type what? What are we creating a set of? So picture we're creating a list here. These angle brackets, we're going to say what is the set of? Well, what do we want to store in our database? It's going to be applications for dating, right? And so we've got here this application type. We are going to create a set of application. So set of application, and then it wants a name. And what do we want to call it? This, whatever we name it here, is what's going to be the name of our table in the database. We already know that our database is going to be called datingapplications.SQLite because that's what we named it here. Now we're actually putting a table in the database. And so each application ends up being a row in the table. Now when we put all the application together, what is it? And so typically we'll just name it applications. And then we'll put on a get set to be able to get and set those properties. Okay, so we created a database set, or we're going to create a database set of type application that we're going to refer to as applications. And when we create the database, this is going to be the table name. All right. Much of this is probably confusing, and that's okay. What I've learned talking to multiple people is repetition helps. We will do this multiple times, and this little process of setting up the context file will become, I was going to say second nature. It's not, maybe not that much. You may have to think about it a little bit, but just writing down the steps. We need to go in and we need to use NuGet to bring in the packages we need. We need to go in the app settings.json and set up the connection string. We need to create a context file, and then the next steps we're going to do. So we just write down the steps, we just follow those, and then we start to get to a point where we don't even need to look at the steps to be able to do it. So anyway, that's setting up the context file. That was our next step, and we will continue on with our last little step we have to do before we can actually go in and create the database. We'll do that in the next video. Spencer out.